Hello, I'm Jesse Berger, founder and artistic director of Red Bull Theater. I'm zooming to you from our offices in Chelsea, Manhattan, the ancestral homes of the Lenape people. Welcome to the second installment of our multi-part, month-long exploration of Shakespeare's Pericles. Tonight's program is the first of Exploring Pericles in 2021, investigating the play particularly from the perspective of theater artists who identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our present moment. Tonight, we're excited to welcome 9 extraordinary artists for a conversation about Shakespeare's play and what it means to engage with classical theater as a BIPOC artist today. Shakespeare's Pericles was our founding play at Red Bull Theater in 2003. I've always loved the idea of this play as a hero journey and a play about the healing power of storytelling itself. And as the play that began the life of our theater company, it seems most appropriate now that we explore this play anew as we continue our journey towards our 20th year of existence as a company, re-emerging out of the pandemic shutdown, and especially inviting new voices to be in creative conversation with this play and the Western classical canon, something we've been very actively working to invigorate over the past few years at Red Bull Theater. This Exploring Pericles in 2021 project, which is sponsored by a generous grant from our friends at the Off-Broadway Angels, began about 6 months ago. We asked 3 established BIPOC artists working in the classical theater who've worked with Red Bull Theater before to introduce us to a number of BIPOC artists who have not yet had significant opportunities to be in dialogue with classics. You'll meet all of these artists in our conversation tonight. And next Monday, October 18th, this panel will be back to share creative presentations in response to Pericles informed by this discussion. The moderator for tonight's conversation will be the terrific actor, director, and scholar, Kent Gash. Kent is the founding director of NYU Tisch School of the Arts Department of Drama's new studio on Broadway, and I was thrilled when he agreed to join us from this project. In addition to facilitating tonight's conversation, Kent will also be directing an online benefit reading of Shakespeare's Pericles, featuring a company of BIPOC artists on Monday, October 25th. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to Kent Gash. Kent, please turn on your video.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Kent Gash, and I am all those things that Jesse Berger just said I was. So,
well, I believe it, and thank you for joining us to moderate the conversation. It's great to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and really eager to hear the various perspectives and thoughts about Pericles and about quote unquote classical work and Shakespeare in 2021, and what does it mean to us?
Well, listen, Kent, I wonder if, sorry to interject, I just wonder if you just take 1 minute or so, and maybe you have so much experience yourself, and maybe if you could speak for a minute about your experience working with the classics.
Sure. I mean, I started I obviously was trained in some classical work when I was in undergrad at Carnegie Mellon. And at that time, I was in undergraduate school long enough ago where there were still a lot of classical work and rep companies happening sort of around the country. And I think there's much less of that work happening now than there used to be. But you know, I did a rep season at Alabama Shakespeare Festival as an actor, and then was lucky enough to do Henry IV, parts 1 and 2 with Joanne Akalitis here at the Public Theater. And then eventually I also wanted to direct, in part because when I was working in the classics, and really when I was working all over kind of American theater as an actor, I was rarely being directed by directors of color, by African-American directors, by directors who were openly members of the LGBTQIA community, you know, and I also knew so many gifted people that were not getting opportunities, that a big part of my becoming a director was about trying to make spaces and rooms where I could make opportunity for other people. And the same thing is what we've been trying to do at New Studio on Broadway at NYU, where my entire full-time faculty is all professors of color and working theater professionals. And that's essential to me, is whenever I can lead in a space, also making room for as many other people who may not be represented as possible. It also just makes our work so compelling and so interesting when many, many, many voices are represented within it.
I agree. Well, you know, those words "making room" just make me think, well, that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to make room for a conversation about this play and what it means to be a BIPOC artist working with the classics. And so maybe that's a good segue to invite everyone else to involved to join us. What do you think, Ken?
Great. I think that's great. Are people joining individually? We introducing?
Bring them all on. Bring them all. Let's have everybody turn on and introduce themselves one by one. I think would be great.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's go to Tara Moses.
Yeah, thank you, Mado. He's Jay Estungo, Teracho Chefkados. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Moses. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. I'm also in Muskogee Creek, and I'm calling in from Narragansett and Wampanoag land, colonially known as Johnston, Rhode Island. Yeah, and I'm excited to be in the conversation today as one of the commissioned artists. I'm a director, a playwright, a dramaturg, an artistic director, a graduate student now. Oh, that's a mess. Anyway, but lots of things. But excited to be talking about Shakespeare with all these lovely people. And shall I throw it to someone? Shall we do that?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Great. Keep it emergent. I'm going to throw it over to Kenny.
Mado Tara, Halka Manuea, Inyach Kenny Ramos, Wichihi, Inyanuwe, Wichihi Benegas, Napum Welch, Kweshamak, Verona Indian Reservation, Kupai. Greetings, everyone. My name is Kenny Ramos. I'm from the Brona Band of Mission Indians and the Kumeyaay Nation in Southern California. I grew up on the Brona Indian Reservation here, and I'm actually zooming in from here, and from unceded Kumeyaay territory. You may know it as San Diego County. Pronouns are he, they. And yes, I'm an ensemble member at Cornerstone Theater Company, and I mostly am an actor, among other, you know, the theater. We do it all, right? We try to do it all. Anyway, but I'm very excited to be here to chat with some friends that I know and some new friends. And yeah, yay! Okay, I'm going to pass it to Maddie.
Hey, everybody, I'm Maddie. I'm a citizen of the Mohegan tribe in Connecticut, but I'm currently zooming in from Acoma Autumn and Peeposh land in Tempe, Arizona, where I am technically now a professor at the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, in addition to my work as a director and playwright. And my pronouns are she, her, and I will pass it over to Jacqueline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Maddie. My name is Jacqueline Lawton, pronouns she, her, hers. I am in Chapel Hill, which is the home of the Eno, Shakori, and Occaneechi communities. I am a playwright and a dramaturg. I'm also a professor at UNC Chapel Hill in the Department of Dramatic Art, and a dramaturg and playwright with Playmakers Repertory Company. And I'm going to pass it over to Fran.
Hello there. I am she, her, hers. I'm an actor. I'm currently in rehearsal in Washington, D.C. for a play that's going to open sometime in the not too distant future at Ford's Theater. I usually live in Austin, Texas, where I'm a professor at UT Austin. And I'm going to pass it on to Rudy.
Thank you, Fran, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Rudy Ramirez. My pronouns are they, them. I am a Mexican theater artist, originally from the land of the Comanche and the Guadaltecans, colonially known as Austin, Texas. I have very recently relocated to central Massachusetts, which is the home of the Nipmuc, Wampanoag, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, and Pecumtuck peoples, and other peoples of the Quinnipiac Valley. And I am a director, producer, and deviser, occasionally even a writer and performer as well. And I will pass it to Yvonne.
Thank you, Rudy. Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am zooming in from a suburb suburb of Chicago called Bolingbrook. I think it's on the Kickapoo land. I'm not sure. But I am a costume and scenic designer. I do not come from the world of theater. I only recently, in the last 4 years, have been introduced because I came from the background of fashion design. I am also a former U.S. Marine Corps vet. And so it is really interesting to dive into this world and, see it with a new lens as opposed to everyone else. So I'm really excited to be here. And am I the last one or is there someone else? Jacqueline, have you gone?
I think Clint.
Clint?
I'll go.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Clint Ramos. I am, my pronouns are he, him, his. I am presently in the land of the Lenini-Nape, still unseated, still stolen. I am originally from the Philippines. I identify as Filipino American, and I am a designer. I am also a creative director and producer, and I'm an educator. I sit on the board of Red Bull as well.
As do I. I always forget to say that.
And we're very glad to have you both on the board. We're proud. And just to point out one thing, that Maddie and Fran and Clint were the ones who nominated the other wonderful artists that we're meeting tonight for the microgrants that are enabling these commissions, which are going to be brief responses, creative responses to the play Pericles. And all we've asked them to do at this point is read the play and think about it. And after tonight's conversation, then there'll be a creative response. Kent, do you want to lead us into the next phase?
Sure, yes. So for our conversation, I thought perhaps best to ask some questions that I find I'm always asking myself. So in hopes that these would jumpstart our thinking and our potential responses, as we're engaging Pericles or engaging really any classical text. And I use the term classical in quotes and as a kind of received thing and a place to begin, knowing that we could unpack the various isms that contribute both to making something or defining something as classical. And in fact, we could all jump in and sort of redefine what classical even means. And maybe that's a part of where this conversation may go. We'll see. But what are the particular ways that this material speaks to and engages and intersects with our unique lived experience as members of many communities? I think I would venture a guess that all of us find ourselves members of many communities, not only one. And how do those identifiers begin to contribute to how we understand or respond to Pericles or really to any classical text? And if it does not in any way speak to us, is that also a response? Anybody want to jump in?
Hi, this is Fran Dorn again. I think my experience with Shakespeare specifically is different from anyone else's here. One is that I'm the oldest one in the room, but I was introduced to Shakespeare when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And what I fell in love with was the language. Now, I knew Shakespeare was a dead white guy, but I lived in a segregated world. So everybody I knew who was doing Shakespeare looked like me. So it didn't occur to me that I shouldn't be able to do it. It was a given. And it was all that gorgeous poetry. And I just like to eat. I always said I like to eat those words. It just felt really great in my mouth. So it wasn't until later that someone said, oh, you shouldn't be doing Shakespeare. You don't look like somebody who should be doing Shakespeare. And I thought, but no, I was kind of born doing Shakespeare. What's your problem? And every time I have done a classical Shakespeare play, I've always assumed that that person obviously was me.
Right.
And whatever I brought to that role was because of what I had experienced. It was up to the audience to deal with, well, she doesn't look like Queen Elizabeth or whatever. That was not my problem. I wasn't responsible for that part. I was responsible for living those characters from the inside out. And the outside is not going to change. Yeah, whoever that Shakespeare character is African-American woman of whatever age I am. That's it.
I will say my experience as an actor was very similar. I was an actor in another life before I was a director. And I sort of, you bring I brought all of who I was possibly to everything that I was doing. And everybody I played was Black. Just because. So those other questions oddly weren't really my questions, like whether I should or should not be doing it or had a right to do it. I was raised in a way that I believed I had a right to do anything I wanted to. And I still do believe that, whether everybody else does or not, Jacqueline, you're muted.
Oh, okay, I saw Madeline also unmuted. Do you want to go? Okay. So I love, Fran, hearing that you were introduced to Shakespeare young. I was also introduced to Shakespeare young. And it's anytime my sister and I were bored, my mother told us to read. So we would pull this big collection, it was a huge book, right? The collection of Shakespeare work. We pulled it off. And so we would read it. And so we read it like you, friend, for the poetry, the imagery, and these magical worlds, that we never heard of. So we'd go to our little globe to try to find these worlds. And then I was told that Shakespeare was hard. And I was like, okay, oh, it's hard. Okay, well, let me find out what's hard about Shakespeare, because that's not how it was introduced to us. And like, my sister loved Julius Caesar. I loved Much Ado About Nothing. And we'd act out these little plays. And then later I started to think about it. So I started to think about it as a playwright, as someone who is a storyteller. So I'd look at his structure, his plot, his character development, the episodic structure. So I would look at all of those things. So that's how I started then to approach Shakespeare. And then it wasn't until much later that I started to look at it through the lens at which I look at it now, which is who's missing, who's not in this story, who does not have the voice, who was writing during this time period, but they were not allowed to come forward because they were a woman or whatever reason. So my relationship with the text has changed as sort of as I've matured and shown up differently as an artist in the world. And now, Madeline, do you want to pop in?
Sure, thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah, so like a lot of folks, I also came to Shakespeare very young, but because of that, I think that I was automatically looking for connections between Shakespeare and other stories that I was being told, between our traditional Mohegan stories. And so whenever I would hear something, there'd be like an automatic kind of like parallel, like where is this similar? And for a long time that was really focused on bridge building. And then as I got older, now I pretty quickly go to what is similar? Where is there something that's like, calling me and my soul? And then where are the huge systemic divides? Where are there things that actually just don't exist in our storytelling at all? And in the case of Pericles, it's an interesting one because there's rather a lot that is very different. But there are some moments that feel still like super resonant, like the fishermen. When the fishermen come on and they start talking about the whales and then the idea of a land whale that then, eats up everything on Earth as well. Like there's something in those metaphors that's very powerful and helps for me when I go through a play as a director now. I usually find the moments like that give me access to the world. And then I can break down where the systemic differences are. And in the case of Pericles, it's also very helpful that you're traveling actually from nation to nation. And so you don't actually need all of the cultural protocols to make sense sense to you, right? Like you can actually be like, okay, this is a world in which these characters are going to these different places, and these different places have different rules, and why do those different places have these different rules? But the thing that actually trips me up the most in Pericles is the sort of medieval, and this is probably why I haven't directed Pericles at this point, right? Because I'm very like specific when I choose to direct a Shakespeare play or not, is the way that the kind of medieval influences create these constructs around what is virtue and what is not, and who gets punished. That's where it all kind of gets really tricky for me, because even when people are being punished, it's not really ever in relationship to a sense of community. You know, people will be punished, but there's no even thinking about what that means for all of the people who are burned around them, or all of the people who are, you know, so that's really the thing that I'm thinking about today. But it also related to me for some reason, and then I will be quiet. Rereading it, I was thinking a lot about how, for whatever reason, the play really wakes up for me in Act 3, when once Pericles is actually not really in the story as much, and suddenly you have these women who are left to sort of figure out what to do with the fact that now they're in these situations of isolation. And then there's this part of me that goes, okay, well, you know, those who think of this as a collaboration tend to say that that's the section that Shakespeare starts writing, and I'm like, you know, yeah, so I'm in like a big circle, right, between like, oh, is that my love of Shakespeare that's making me go, oh, the play suddenly like has deeper meaning to me at this point, or is it the fact that we're then suddenly looking at things in the world in a different way? But yeah, for me, the thing that's really tricky is I'm always looking at the connections, but then there are certain things in terms of the way that individualism versus community and morality operate that are very different. And so when I'm engaging with the text, I'm also looking to either intervene or comment or engage with what those ideas are, and then how we approach them as a community together. If the community isn't accountable in the text, how are we as an audience and as a community come out accountable to those ideas of community around the text, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So similarly to everyone else, my introduction to Shakespeare was also very young, but specifically it was when I was 5, 6 years old. And my introduction to Shakespeare came because I was put into a speech class in kindergarten, but I did not have a speech impediment or a lisp or anything. I was put into speech class because I was speaking Muskogee in the classroom, and the teacher used Shakespeare's sonnets and words to get me to stop speaking Muskogee and speak proper English. And so my introduction to Shakespeare was deeply, deeply colonial. And also for folks tuning in at home, I'm 99% sure I'm the youngest person here today. And so that was not that long ago, y'all. Early 90s, I was late 90s, that was not that long ago. Anyway, and they still be doing it. And so, yeah, so having that first very violent introduction to Shakespeare, that is the lens in which I constantly view it. And so many of his works for me, I mean, are so deeply violent, are so deeply colonial, are so like deeply rooted in these structures and like that are not for me, are not of my people, that I do not relate to. And I'm just like, a lot of this can be solved if y'all weren't just like power hungry like Europeans. Anyway, but so for me in the process of like directing Shakespeare, adapting Shakespeare, because I've done that, you know, being part of this commission, like why the hell did I say yes if this is my relationship? Anyways, that what I am interested in is similar to what Maddie said about like, well, where are those moments of connect? But I do think we need to be very specific. First and foremost, Shakespeare ain't universal, so drop it. These are not universal stories and themes, absolutely not. But so for me with Pericles, even though I keep pronouncing it wrong, like Hercules, you know, I think it's more fun. Anyway, but for me, it was like trying to find, well, what are the things that we are in the same language? Because for so much of it, I have to translate into like themes and like relationships that I understand. But one thing that I did not have to translate, which I did appreciate, was this theme of resilience. You know, I'm wearing my little resilient shirt, you know, a mix of indigenous resilience, and it says lactose intolerance at the bottom. That's funny. Anyway, funny joke for another day. But the resilience throughout, especially like with Marina and with Pericles, every time You all know my struggle now, the past month. It's been a struggle. Anyway, yeah, I find to be a connection point that I just like really dived into. And so that's sort of where I'm sitting with it. I'm really excited to hear about other connection points. I mean, there are more for sure, but yeah, that's the biggest one for me as of right now and where I'm approaching this work from.
Hi, everyone. So my introduction to Shakespeare is kind of funny, and I feel so, again, weird in the sense that I do not come from a theater background. So I went to Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in the Dallas, Texas area for visual arts. And one day our teacher rolled in the TV, so that's how old I am. She rolled in the TV and then she put on Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. And that's how I was introduced. And I was like, what is this? This is awesome. And I was like, this is Shakespeare? Like, you can do this? Like, you know, the gun and that's supposed to be sword. I just like fell in love with it. And then as I got older and I got into grad school, I was like, why are people obsessed with this foreigner? He's like this crusty, musty, like old white man. He's not even like, you know, American. And I had interesting conversations with people from the UK who were like, what is America's obsession? Because they too were like, what is going on? And I myself, I am not that much of a fan of his, actually. I like his tragedies more than his comedies. His comedies irritate me just in the scope of like, it is too many people, it is too much going on. And I'm a simple human being. I understand like man's internal struggles. So that's why like Macbeth, like Othello, all of those, I'm like, okay, that resonates with me. But all the silly stuff, I'm just like, who's turning into a donkey? Like, why is she pretending to be this like boy to get with this girl? And I'm like, okay, so we got a lot of cross-dressing here. Like, what is going on? Like, can we stick to like one thing here? I'm getting like whiplash. But doing some research as a designer, doing, you know, my due diligence, it turned out that he actually had a lot to do with English, just the spoken word. And the first dictionary that came out, like he invented so many words apparently that are in the dictionary, like 3,000 something. And I was like, oh, okay. And so that was just an interesting relation that's like this man just came up with all of these things that's kind of like what resonates with us as Americans now is the vocabulary. And so that was something that was very interesting to me because I was looking up on the internet, like what is going on? I need an answer when, you know, I decided to take this on. And so that's something that made me want to join us to explore that more. Like that's where, you know, where my interests lie. Because again, a lot of the times, again, I'm a simple person. I'm a Marine, I'm a jarhead. And so I'm like, half the time I'm struggling with understanding the text and have to like go over and over again to like pull from it and understand the words. But I just found it so fascinating to know that he actually is the reason we have a lot of like the vocabulary that we do.
I'm gonna go. I think for me, I don't want to lose sight of like this question, the original question about the classics for me, and how we actually how we land our at least myself into what I think is the are the classics. I don't have any response to that as of yet, but I do want to sort of contemplate. I remember the first time I encountered Shakespeare was through text and like scene studies, like in high school when we were reading it aloud. And I remember sort of, particularly because English is not my first language, you know, being really confused about why are we actually studying this, right? Like, why is it important? And you know, I mean, we did read a lot, but I was very, you know, coming from a highly colonized culture, I was very conscious of what we were reading and why we were reading it and why that was sort of and what the calibration of excellence was in terms of literature, and where it was founded. And but I remember sort of anchoring, because I couldn't really understand. I remember anchoring myself to these characters that he wrote, right? And specifically these women characters who, who talked a lot about sort of beautifully about suffering, about, like not being able to express something. And because, that fed into sort of the colonial mentality that I've had and that the rest of the Filipino people had, it fed into that sense of shame. It fed into that sense of like guilt, right? Like I remember the lines of like Miranda, like saying something about like, she's weeping, right? Because you can't tell Ferdinand how much she loves him, right? Like, and they just met, right? And he asks her like, this is in The Tempest, why are you crying? And she's like, she says something like, to dare not offer what I desire to give, but much less take what I should die to want. It's like, and I just like all of a sudden like, oh wow, she like kind of talked about like how I was operating in the world. Like I was like, like loving on these, I had unrequited love for all these guys. I was like, gay and chubby and like, what I mean? Like he spoke it, and then I was just like thinking, oh great, this guy actually kind of understands what I'm like, whatever. And but then I kind of like wrote on that and kind of just like chose to see that, right? But like going back to this conversation about the classics and how that Shakespeare is almost like, when we talk about the classics, it's really blanket, like he blankets that kind of like that land, right? And I'm just like thinking, how did he get to do that, right? And how did it happen? And it's not really about this like dead white man, really. It's about who gets to actually appropriate stories, right? Because a lot of his stories are culled from old stories, right? Who gets to do that, number one, and which kind of stories actually get to be preserved, right? And to me, a lot of like my contemplations about Shakespeare and his popularity, and his popularity is really in colonized cultures, right? Like and I think there's something in there that for me that operates on a really an epigenetic level. I do feel like somehow he is writing, during a time where there was high conquest, right? And I think there is something in the themes, in the sort of, even the very sort of short things that he said that operates on me, on that, just because of my mongrelized culture, right? Like it operates on a sort of really deep level. And in terms of Pericles, what I latch onto Pericles is this idea of immigration and that and the idea of finding home, and actually being this itinerant, this not even an itinerant, like a refugee almost, like and that the prize is actually that somehow he needed to go away to find his way home, right? And as highly romanticized as that is, like that journey becomes sort of the thread through and how we forgive all of this like bad behavior that happens in the human beings along the way. And to me, that's really profound, right? Like, because when we really think of it, and how, if I think of it, like, how does this person actually, what does this person look like to me right now, right? And I cannot see him as white. I just can't. I just can't. Like, that's my story, my immigration story. The migrants that I see now, the refugees that I see now. Like, I'm mentoring this young woman who just came in a refugee camp from Afghanistan and trying to get into college in the United States. Like, fled after 3 attempts. I'm like, I cannot see Pericles as a white man. And so I think that's where I I also kind of like say, oh, I can latch on to it that way, right? Because this is sort of what we're talking about. But do I need to do Shakespeare right now in my life? I don't know. I mean, that's sort of still the question, right? Like, so whenever somebody says, hey, do you want to design a play or do you want to do something, blah, 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 I really have to like do a deep dive into my spirit and ask myself, like, why am I doing this? Am I doing it because I want to work out some colonial shit that I want to work out? Or am I doing it because I'm actually really, it's necessary, that I need to do it as an artist,
I would love to jump in as a still chubby queer person, and it's interesting because I think that I feel like I'm connecting to a lot of different threads. Like I think about how it was, I think in many ways my mother introduced me to Shakespeare because she, as a Mexicana in South Texas, for her, like having an English teacher, like in her words, I think it was like, show her that these Mexican children could do Shakespeare was this big vote of confidence for her. And so it was very, very meaningful in that regard. But then it was also later on realizing like, presenting, again, this was about learning English. It was about like learning English and about showing your mastery of it. And I think that a lot of, when I was a kid, I got really into Shakespeare in particular because it was sort of saying like, yes, like I know what you expect of me, but here's what I can do with language. Here, like I can master this sort of like apex of English language. And then even on top of that, thinking that like the language that was, being denied at the time was Spanish, which is itself a colonial language. So it's like layers and layers and layers of things happening. And I absolutely, as I read Pericles like in college, and I was like, I could not remember anything, but I remember that I kind of liked it. And then coming back to it, I was really struck by particularly the moment of like parents being separated from children, husbands being separated from wives, and what is still happening at the border. These detention centers are still there, and these children are still being held, and we've forgotten about so much of what's going on. And these are people who are indigenous to this land who are being held as immigrants or as aliens, and so that to me was something that I really locked into in terms of like, oh, there is something here that I'm responding to and that fascinates me. Particularly, I think how there's this, I think Jacqueline, you were talking about not just Shakespeare stories, but other stories that it becomes connected to, and how, in the middle of this story, we get Snow White all of a sudden, like with Marina, like with that storyline of the stepmother wanting to, or not, or the adoptive mother, in this case, wanting to kill her. And I think she's described as being like white as snow. And I started thinking about fairy tales and this story as well, as like, home has become dangerous for you. And when home becomes dangerous, what do you do? Where does that take you? And there's actually even another story about a princess whose father has fallen in love with her, and how she has to do all these fairy tale things to get away from the relationship. Because that's the thing that I keep banging my head against, is bad child, worse father. Is just like, on what planet is this young woman culpable for what her father has done to her in the first part of this play? And I started thinking about that there are other stories out there that put young women in that situation, but then figure out how to get them out of it. And I was like, I want to do some mashing up of things, as I so often do. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about going into it.
Oh my gosh, I think that leaves me. I'm just gonna jump in. This is so great. I love listening to everybody's thoughts and relationships with Shakespeare, and it's just really great. I don't really, I feel like, have a relationship with Shakespeare. Wasn't introduced to him until I don't even know when. Like, I think in high school, I went to a high school right off my reservation that specialized in agricultural like stuff. Actually, like there was an ag program. There was no theater class or anything like that. So I know we read, Shakespeare in my like honors and AP English class, and that was just it. It was treated as like that, and I don't know, like in a very academic type of setting. It wasn't really. It was, and so in a way, it felt like separate from actually being able to embody it as a play and through performance, which is a bummer. I wish we did it differently. Anyway, but at that time I was also very active in musical theater, and I was working in the San Diego regional theater musical scene up until I went to college. And when I went to college, I didn't study theater. I studied American Indian Studies, and I quit theater altogether because realizing how racist my experiences were in the musical theater as a Native person, doing all those plays, and Shakespeare wasn't something, and because there was this like kind of like the musical theater world and the other theater world, and Shakespeare was very much in that. It wasn't really something that I engaged with until many years later. Like I've only done one Shakespeare show, and actually Maddie directed me in that, so that's like you're wondering how I did Shakespeare with Maddie. And I did do a season at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, but I wasn't in a Shakespeare show. I was working on a native adaptation of a Shakespeare show. So I think I'm in this interesting place hearing about everyone's like long relationships with this man from 5 years old and up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. Like I don't trust him. I don't trust him. I'm still working on trying to figure that out. There's some things that I enjoy because very much it was treated, I think, as Shakespeare, it was treated as this like intimidating and like kind of like high thing that I don't think was really in the realm in my sphere as like as a Native person on my reservation, that was something that was even like thought of as attainable, that's something that we could do, or it would be part of like our experiences. Like I'm trying to even think, I don't even think many people on my reservation have read Shakespeare. But anyway, and my first Shakespeare audition though that I did, and it was for OSF. It was my very first time ever really engaging with Shakespeare. I'm like, oh, I have this OSF audition. I guess I should do a Shakespeare monologue. And so a friend recommended one to me, and I worked on it, and I did it, and I nailed it. And one of the people in the room, the playwright actually, who was a Native playwright, spoke to me weeks later, and he was like kind of surprised. And I was reflecting on this experience recently, like surprised that I did what I did, because there's no Shakespeare on my resume. There's no like anything like that. And so this notion of like, I like of Native people being able to, I guess, perform Shakespeare. I don't know. I'm still kind of, that memory came back to me like a couple months ago, and I don't know. It was like kind of an interesting compliment to receive. Like, oh, cool. Like he thought I did a good job, but then at the same time, like, but is this also coming from a place of like that Native people aren't expected to be able to perform Shakespeare? Or anyway, I don't know. Okay, sorry. So I'm just now I feel like I need some therapy, I think, about Shakespeare, because I'm just coming to terms with, I guess, my relationship with him, because as I continue on. But with Pericles, I will say, and with theater in general, and the work that I choose to work on, is the questions I always ask about the piece is like how it ties back to tribal sovereignty, and how it like is I do a lot of contemporary Native theater, and to me, if it's not like asserting and preserving tribal sovereignty, then I'm not really that interested in it. And but sometimes those things do manifest in Shakespeare in interesting ways. With the piece with Maddie, it was the fact that there was so many Natives involved with it, and there were so many barriers being broken. Doing Shakespeare on the plains in South Dakota, and Native kids coming to see that, I think that's very valuable, and does promote the growth of tribal sovereignty in terms of tribal people engaging with theater and text and so on. But with this piece in particular, the things that stood out to me were, yes, notions of sovereignty that Maddie touched on in terms of the journeying from place to place, and the changing of customs of leadership of sovereignty, and they even say like sovereigns. I don't know the words I got. But then the other thing too is the way human trafficking manifested in the piece, and is very resonant for me because of, you know, the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women that is very prevalent in the United States and Canada, in North America. And that to me was a point of entry, although haven't fully necessarily unpacked that or processed that, but you know, it was something that came up in Marina's story and was, you know, very much a part of her journey, and knowing that that is just something that we very much experience in our lived realities every day as Native people. I mean, I just came from working in South Dakota last month, and there was an event that happens in Sturgis that is one of the highest, an event where Native women are human trafficked, like just immensely. Anyway, so that's something that has stood out to me about this piece, approaching it from, I guess, my perspective as a Native person. And anyway, I don't really know what else to say right now. I'm going to pass it to whoever else wants to talk, and that's that.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I don't know exactly yet how to, I mean, because I'm in the midst of working with the play, through the play, on the play in a bunch of different ways. The thing that struck me, still the sense of, a sense somehow of, you know, Tara, I think, mentioned resilience. You know, Black people, especially our history and existence in this country, has been so unbelievably precarious, remains precarious. Black death, families separated, families torn apart and ripped apart in the slave trade. And I believe that and hope somehow that we all find our family members, that we are able to reconnect, even across time and space and across a lot of other things. Brutality visited on Black people remains far too common. And so there are things in this story for me that connect in a cautionary way, as a kind of parable. And I have to say, in many ways for me, I wish the play was called Marina. And I do think it takes a sharp turn and kind of becomes a different play when she rolls up in there. And so I'm in the process still very much of interrogating and discovering the many things that the play may hold, but I agreed to work on it and to investigate it and step into it and explore it for those reasons, because I think it's a play about finally about reuniting disparate family, and for all the families that have not been able to reunite, for all the people who haven't found each other, a tale where that's possible seems worth telling to me. And I do think Pericles learns something. He goes through a journey, and a great cost is exacted, and ultimately he has to lose everything to find out what the fuck is important. And I don't know that that's a tale that gets old. So those are some of the doors I'm trying to open through the storytelling that I hope to open, that I hope to access. We'll see. Jesse, where should I be going now?
We've got about 10 more minutes. I think we can go. I mean, I feel we're just only scratching the surface. There's so many really interesting things that have been said, and I'm just so grateful to be listening to all of you. I mean, I think we could take the conversation anywhere we want to go, or as Nathan said, we could end early if we feel like this is a good spot, if people feel like they've said everything they feel about saying now. Maddie, I see you raising, is that a yawn, or is that a,
I vote for not ending it early just because I have so many follow-up thoughts already that I'm sure other people do too.
Oh, go girl.
Good.
Well, I mean, okay, sorry. So just the Marina thing, the thing that's bothering me right now about Marina is I also would much rather watch the play Marina personally, but is this idea that at the end, so the prostitutes are selling her to this man, and then Pericles shows up and he gives her to the man that she was going to be sold to anyway. Like, that's the sort of thing where I'm like, why? Like, why does that need to be in the play? And I understand it's like very much ingrained in the political systems of the time, but that's the kind of, that's where it gets tricky for me, because I'm like, you know, it's like, what do you do with that? And then the other thing that's tricky for me, and I don't know why I'm highlighting the things that are tricky for me right now, except for that there are certain ones of Shakespeare's plays that I find easier to align to my cultural values than others. And then the other thing with this one is like, he leaves his people. Who are his people, first of all? And then, because he's supposed to be ruling a nation in theory, he leaves them forever. And then they seek an alternative leader. And that leader's like, no, you're going to continue to not have a leader because your leader is just gone indefinitely. And so that sort of like lack of accountability to the people of whatever nation is Tyre is also something that I find very difficult, because if he was just a man who was not accountable to a nation, that's very different than the idea that he is supposed to be a leader. And yet the fact that they want him to come back says something to me about maybe what kind of leader he could be. And so that's something that and the fact that he brings the food, right, to Tarsus. So those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in that aren't, in the case of this particular play, I feel like as present in the text as potentially they could be, but are still ideas that are sort of rifling around. Because there's just so many things in this particular one where I'm like, oh, it's okay for it to be a world in the mud, but I still want to be able to show people a way out. Like, where is the way out? Where is the showing people the way to a better world? Or are we just revealing the things that are the traps? That's because the scene with Marina and Pericles, like similar to the scene between Viola and Sebastian, like Shakespeare writes these reunion scenes where it's like they like just, your soul is unfolding. You know what I mean? You can't move through that scene and not have a certain thing happen. But then I'm like, but then you give her to this guy. So anyway, I'm just gonna leave it on that. So
yeah, he does. He does.
I'm interested in the way people look at this play overall. As an actor, I'm always just trying to find a way in. And I will admit that all of what were commonly known, formerly known as the romances, but now there's something else, those 4 plays, I personally have always found problematic, because it's like, nobody behaves this way, nobody acts that way, nobody does that. And then I have to be reminded it's a tale. It's kind of a fantasy. It's it's in the mud, as Maddie says. Yeah. And that's how you have to approach it. And that's very hard for me. You know, I start this play and I think, why did he make that riddle so easy? You know, any idiot could figure that out. And then it's like, don't think that. That's not part of your job, friend. You're just gonna get stuck in the mud. In the same way that I think I asked the director 100 years ago when I did Winter's Tale, where was she for 16 years? You know, those questions are just not useful to telling the story. The thing that amazes me, or I find most interesting about this play overall, is things are seldom what they seem. Yeah, how easily people are fooled, or someone looks like a really nice person, you know, Dionysa, I think that's the way her name is pronounced, you know, oh yes, take care of my child. And then, you know, 16 years later, let's kill her because my daughter is jealous. And you think, whoa, that was even at the very beginning with that, the daughter and the king, yes, they look like really nice people. She looks like a really nice person, not so much. But appropriate to what other people have said, it's like, that young woman at the beginning of the play has been abused by her father, and then she gets punished because she must have done something. Yeah, it's like, come on, that doesn't happen. Well, obviously it happens all the time, unfortunately, but it's not the story we want to think works well. So whoever is producing that has to contextualize that scene and that understanding of how she is also a victim, yes, and the end of her is quite unfair given all that. Yeah, anyway, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I absolutely, like, I think it's a thing that I kept, so, and as I kept coming back to it, I kept thinking about this fairy tale called Donkey Skin. And it's an old, like, Grimm fairy tale, and it was made into a foobar French movie, by the way, called Pedan. If you want to see, like, horrifying French Lisa Frank on acid, like, it's ridiculous. Anyway, but it's like this idea that, like, a girl is a princess is her father's fallen in love with her. So she, like, commands him to make these fantastical dresses, and then she steals the skin of this donkey to hide herself, and she goes and she runs away, and she becomes like she becomes a scullery maid, and of course gets to marry the prince at the end, and sort of a Cinderella variant in certain ways. And I really got thinking about the stories that people tell one another to deal with trauma. The stories, like the fantasies we create to give us hope in those times as well, and how I think these Pericles, a lot of the stories within Pericles feel like maybe this isn't actually what happened, but this is the story that's being told in the moment, to deal with it, to deal with the pain of it. I mean, I think it's very far-fetched to imagine that Marina would be for that long in a brothel, and just every time she talks to somebody, she's just so virtuous that they decide to say, all right, I'm not going to touch you, I'm going to become a more virtuous person now. And how fairy tales, I think, are very similar. They're often stories that deal with the traumas of growing up, and the traumas of, quite often faced by women in particular, in a world where they had very little autonomy. And so I'm wondering how to create a version of this that makes it clear that these are not the true stories of the characters, but they are what they're telling one another to survive whatever it is that they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We are at our 3-minute warning, in fact, and so all of our micro grantees, and Jesse, I'll rely on you to keep me honest here, but I want to, certainly based on our conversations and on your own exploration and responses to Pericles, you now will be creating your own response, your own meditation, your own whatever you want it to be. And I have to say, based on this conversation, I can't wait to find out what people do. and choose what you choose to explore. Jesse, am I leaving out?
No, thank you, Kent. I mean, I completely agree. I wish we had more time to talk. It's so great and inspiring to hear all of you talking about this play and from all your different perspectives. And I really just want to thank all of you for sharing so openly. And I am also really looking forward to hearing all of the micro grantee artists, seeing and hearing your creative responses to it over the next few weeks as those come in. And we will gather again for all of our audience watching. We'll gather again on October 18th to share those together with Clint and Maddie and Fran in conversation with these artists. And then on October 25th to see the reading that Kent is creating with a group of BIPOC artists for our online reading of Shakespeare's Pericles. So again, I just want to thank all of you very much for participating. And as I said earlier, I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, but I learned a lot already. And I really enjoyed meeting those of you who were meeting for the first time. And thank you for sharing with the Red Bull Theater community. And thank all of you for participating in this way. Thank you. Anyone else have something else they want to say before we say goodnight?
Just thank you to everyone.
Okay, thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you all soon.